These are the best and worst Pokemon from each generation. Now with each new Pokemon game, we're set with tons of new creatures to build bonds with, ones that will help us travel across the land, defeat trainers, and aim to be the very best. And as new games release, more Pokemon have been added into the mythos. Whether you've been playing since Pokemon Red and Blue, or if Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is your first entry, we all have Pokemon that we absolutely adore, and others where we wonder how they even got this far in the developmental stage. Although what Pokemon you like is ultimately up to your own taste. What might be a favorite for one trainer might be an absolute nightmare for another, which made me want to go back to the ones that I adore and despise. This is obviously going to be an extremely subjective video, considering there are now over 1,000 of these godforsaken creatures wandering in the Pokemon world, so I might love your favorite or hate them even more. Only time will tell. I wanted to go through all of the generations from the very beginning to pick my favorite and least favorite from each one. Pokemon partners that I have special connections with versus Pokemon that I often forget even exist. Before I get into that though, let me know in the comment section below your all-time favorite Pokemon and your all-time least favorite Pokemon. I imagine not a single comment is going to have a similar answer since everyone has their own tales connected to these monsters. From Kanto to Paldea, all of these Pokemon are here to make the world feel more alive and lived in. And I'm not here to talk about the Pokemons that are the best in terms of their battle skills, but ultimately how I feel about these Pokemon across all types of Pokemon media. Like when I see the Pokemon, I have to have a visceral reaction from the games, the anime, the merchandise, or one of the other million Pokemon products. These Pokemon are either on the team or part of the opposition. Here are my favorite and most despised Pokemon from each generation. I always loved how Gyarados was also perceived as this giant monster in the Pokemon lore. Every trainer regards those who train one of these Pokemon as patient and one of the best. And it's something that you can get really early in almost any Pokemon game. Capturing a Magikarp and raising it up to level 20 will get you this absolute unit. And Magikarp in itself is designed to be the most difficult to raise, barely having an attacking move with absolutely abysmal stats. Like you send this thing out in battle and it will die within just a turn or two if you're lucky. But work on that grind and Gyarados will be a permanent member of your team. There's just something so inspiring about a Pokemon basically coming up from nothing to become one of the best out there. It can also fly, which, while being a flying type Pokemon, looks a bit funny when it's chilling outside of the water. I tried to avoid putting Gyarados on my team for every Pokemon game since Magikarp is insanely common, and now with the era of the EXP share not being able to be turned off, it's easier than ever before to get this monster super early. First off, I want to mention that Kadabra and Alakazam are super dope Pokemon, acting as one of the few psychic-type Pokemon in older generations, and having one on your team will make your experience much easier when going through the Pokemon League. But you know the pain of trying to capture an Abra out in the wild? Because trying to get one is a test of your own patience. No matter what Pokemon game Abra is in, it will constantly teleport away from the player if you fail to capture or defeat it. Getting it to spawn is already tough enough with the spawn rates varying pretty low between games, but then you actually have to be quick and hope that it doesn't break out before you even have the chance to throw a Pokeball. Then when you do finally capture it, it's basically worthless until you evolve it into a Kadabra at level 16. Not only that, but in order to evolve it into an Alakazam, you need to trade with another player, which for several entries of the Pokemon series, I did not have friends to trade with. So collecting Alakazam was a pain in the neck. It's often where I would just catch a Kadabra instead of worrying about an Abra to save myself some time. A lot of my love for the older Pokemon definitely stems from the Pokemon anime, and that does not change when it comes to Johto's time-traveling Pokemon. I remember being obsessed with the Pokemon Forever movie when it came out. The beautiful forest landscapes and the quest for Ash to save this Pokemon has always been my favorite. To be fair, I've always just been a big fan of time travel and stories, and seeing how the past, present, and future all connect in different ways. Also, Celebi is just so adorable to look at. With its giant head and big ol' eyes, it's hard to look at this Pokemon and not want to smile. Celebi's also been tied with removing the darkness from Pokemon's hearts when looking at Pokemon Coliseum. And if you know me, I definitely have an affinity for wanting to defeat the darkness too. So me and Celebi have that in common. I mean, do I really need to say anything about this Pokemon? Its stats are really bad, making it so it's not usable in battle. It doesn't evolve until several generations later, making it stuck this way for most of the Pokemon series. This design looks like it might keel over from a random illness at any time. Like it looks like it has the flu 24/7. And overall just feels like a space in the Pokedex that they just needed to fill in. I do like the little wings on its back because I'm just a sloot for wings, obviously. But every time I encounter this Pokemon, I immediately feel like I'm being robbed of my precious time. The only time I can think of Dunsparce being in a positive light is in Pokemon Mystery Dungeons Gates to Infinity, where it plays a bigger role in assisting the main cast of characters. But even then, this Pokemon is portrayed as weak and useless. Like, it already knows. Dunsparce bringing down the good name of Johto. We all have our own favorite partner Pokemon, and the Torchic line is my absolute favorite. No matter what the Pokemon game is, I always try to collect the Torchic, Combusken, and Blaziken for my collection. I spend many nights hiding my Game Boy Advance under my pillow so I can squeeze out a few more hours of my adventure whenever I could. The design is super sick, with it being the original fire and fighting type starter before everyone stole its flow right after. I remember growing up and watching the Pokemon anime, and this Pokemon showed up during the Johto arc and completely demolished Ash, and I was so distraught when Ash got completely bodied by this Blaziken, but it made me want to run this Pokemon even more. before. So when I finally got my hands on Ruby and Sapphire, the rest was history. This is my favorite Pokemon of all time, out of all the species from any generation. It will always remain the GOAT in my eyes, just as we all have our own favorite starter Pokemon to go along with it. Starting in Generation 2, breeding was added to the game to bring along fan favorites like Togepi, Magby, Elekid, Pichu, and so much more. When we jumped into Generation 3, we got 2 new baby Pokemon into the mix, Azurill and Wynot. To me, both of these Pokemon feel more like Generation 2 Pokemon instead, since that's the gen where the babies were introduced, so every time I'm reminded that Azurill is from Generation 3, it throws me for a loop. Not only that, but who's asking for a baby form of Marill? Like, Marill in itself is already the babiest looking baby in the world, but this one is just smaller and worse. To get it to evolve into a Marill, you need to raise up its friendship to the max, which can take a lot of time in the older games, when in reality, you should just capture a Marill instead. Marill evolves into a Azumarill starting at level 18, which isn't too hard to get to at all. I promise you'll have an Azurill surpassing level 18 before it has its friendship maxed out. Just capture a Marill and call it a day. So funny enough, my love for this Pokemon is something that's pretty new for me. As someone who grew up with Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, Snover and Abomasnow were just normal slots in the Pokedex. The thing that made it my favorite for this gen is how I've been using it in Pokemon Go. Besides just being able to go outside and capture Pokemon, Pokemon Go has a pretty fun and addictive competitive battling system, where 2 trainers compete with 3 Pokemon until one of the trainers loses all of their Pokemon. Abomasnow can basically break through every shield in just a few turns with its Weather Ball ability, and Razor Leaf is the perfect quick attack to use for extra damage. Because of this combination, I've been able to win tons of battles and gain helpful items. I even have 2 competitively ready Abomasnows ready to go at any moment's notice. This Pokemon has led me to victory so many times it has grown as my favorite from the Sinnoh region. I don't know what it is about this Pokemon, but it severely lacks any form of sauce. Like, we already have 6 million fish Pokemon, and this one just adds to the roster. Its stats don't make it stick out, and its evolution is nothing to write home about. It's one of those Pokemon that I would immediately run away from when encountering it in Sinnoh. I honestly forgot this creature even existed until I jumped back into Pokemon Legends Arceus, where you can occasionally see it spawning within the water biomes. But overall, there are just better water-type Pokemon to choose from. I will say I do somewhat like the design of its evolution. I just have nothing special to point out for this Pokemon. I guess its shiny form is pretty good and stands out a lot when compared to the original, but even at this point, I'm really grasping at straws to come up with something positive to say. This Pokemon is just here. Hooray. On the other hand, Crocodile is one of my favorite designed Pokemon. The color of red on its body with the combination of white and black just make it so clean. And a lot of people like to bag on the designs for Generation 5, and I honestly can't blame them. There are a handful of interesting looking Pokemon from Unova, but Crocodile is just so simple but effective in what it needs to get done. Also, with it being a grounded dark type Pokemon, it gives it so many options when running its moveset. You need to raise it up all the way up until level 40, but the work is well worth it when you finally have one of the best physical attackers in the game. Not only that, but it can either run Intimidate or Moxie as its ability, with Intimidate lowering the attack of your foe, while Moxie raises Crocodile's attack after defeating an enemy. Overall, this is a Pokemon I'm eagerly looking forward to using when they eventually remake the Pokemon Black and White games. Someday. This Pokemon is actually a core memory for me when going through the Unova games. I remember going through the game for the first time and entering Route 8 with all of its marshy swamps, and running into Stunfisk shortly after stepping into the depths. And I vividly remember going, ew, when I saw its design for the first time. This Pokemon looks like they wanted a pancake Pokemon and just threw a derpy face on it. It's a ground electric type Pokemon, making it so electric moves do nothing against this thing, but I'm not even worried about how viable this Pokemon is. I just got tired of looking at it every time it showed up on my screen. Funny enough, even though I really disliked the original Unovan Stunfisk, I actually really like the design for the Galarian Stunfisk. The black and green clamshell design really works and makes it feel more like a trap that players can fall into. But the original Stunfisk from Unova, yeah, I'm a hater. I don't like it. It just looks so derpy without purpose. And it's often a Pokemon I try to skip over every chance I get. I remember when Pokemon X and Y were teasing the introduction of a new evolution, so they posted a video of this Pokemon without saying what the type is first. This led so many people to their own theories of what typing it would be, for it later to become revealed as the Fairy typing. As far as Fairy Pokemon go, Sylveon is definitely one of my favorites. I did have Espeon as my favorite evolution before this one stepped into the scene. With it being able to learn moves of so many different types and having his strong special attack stat to hold it down, it immediately grew to be one of my favorites. Not only that, but because Eevee is basically in every Pokemon game, you can get a Sylveon in almost every entry after X and Y. The Pokemon Company knows they need them in the game to sell all that Eevee merchandise. This is also one of the few Pokemon to have its evolutionary method change between games, as when it first dropped you needed to have at least 2 levels of affection, which is something gained by using the Pokemon Ami mechanic. As for later games, you just need to raise up its friendship while knowing a Fairy type move. Regardless, it's one of my favorite Pokemon from Kalos and is overall my favorite Fairy type out there. Another fairy type was introduced in this generation and gave me absolutely nothing to work with. In general, Carbink is designed to be a support Pokemon for the much more popular Diancie. It does not evolve, and all the lore attached to it is defined by its rock and fairy typing. Diancie itself is said to be a Pokemon that undergoes a mysterious mutation, and Diancie is made to lead the rest of the Carbink inside of their Crystal Kingdom. So everything that's special about Carbink is only because of its connection to another Pokemon. Its stats aren't anything unique, and its shiny form is an okay one at best. But in general, I'm often forgetting this Pokemon even exists after I capture it. I think this one would benefit from an evolution where the Diancie mutation process possibly goes wrong, or rather something to make it a bit stronger or useful in battle. Overall, Carbink is just one push to the shadows while their queen takes in all of the glory. When I played Pokemon Sun and Moon, I actually ended up going with Rowlet instead of Litten. In general, I do like Rowlet a lot more as a starter Pokemon, but all of my love for Incineroar actually comes from outside of the Pokemon games, and rather jumps into Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Anytime Masahiro Sakurai gets a character in his hands, he brings out all the sauce possible to bring them to life in this fighting game. Incineroar in Smash is bashful and glows, and he knows he's the best wrestler in town. And while his recovery leaves a lot to be desired, I love defeating my foes with this Pokemon.
Situation from One D! Hold them her legs and try this side. Oh! The Viper is back! From the top rope, back leg and all! Not from up there! Silverplex! Oh, yeah!
When I can suplex Nintendo characters with another Pokemon, let me know. Until then, Incineroar can maintain these hands. Wow, it's another Pokemon that I completely forget exists if I don't look at it directly. Komala is a normal type Pokemon from Alola that doesn't have any evolutionary forms. It hugs this little log with its eyes closed, just trying to enjoy his nap, while I'm here crawling into bed because of how boring this Pokemon is. The one thing that makes this Pokemon stand out is its ability Comatose, allowing it to use sleep-related moves like Snore and Sleep Talk without needing to be asleep. He's able to fight while being completely out cold. It's definitely another Pokemon that would have benefited from having an evolution, maybe even a fighting type version where he picks up the log and uses it as a weapon. But as it is now, Komala is a Pokemon that even puts myself asleep. Normally in my first Pokemon playthroughs, I often ignore the Pokemon you encounter in the earlier rounds. It's often that these Pokemon early on don't really have the stats I need to become stronger in the later game, so I often wait before I've seen a few towns before I start to expand my team. Then I met Choodle, the rock and water type Pokemon that appears in the first route in Pokemon Sword and Shield, and it immediately became one of my favorite Pokemon ever. Not only is this typing super helpful for coverage against foes in the early game, Dreadnought has a Gigantamax form, making it a threat throughout the entire experience. I also just love this little dude's design with his giant overweight head and its little alfalfa haircut. Choodle was a Pokemon that joined me throughout my entire adventure, even often surpassing my starter as my favorite on the team. And when it was finally time to face off against Leon, Dreadnought was the Pokemon to close out this incredibly challenging battle and win me the championship. Since then, I've used Choodle often as one of my Twitch emotes. This little turtle just has a very special place in my heart. When I think of this Pokemon, instead of thinking of the Pokemon itself, I immediately start thinking about the other Pokemon that just consumes it. Arrokuda is just used to make Cramorant seem more like a unique Pokemon, with Cramorant eating Arrokuda and using it as a projectile in combat. Like, the most important thing this Pokemon is known for is being spit out by another Pokemon. Cramorant can also consume a Pikachu and spit that out as well. Arrokuda reminds me a lot of Carbink in the way that it's just another support Pokemon, and I often forget this even exists. The fish Pokemon are the most plentiful, and this one is just here to make the bird look a little bit better. I really wish I had more to say, but I just kind of feel bad for this thing. Like, its entire reputation is that it's supposed to be spit up. Sounds like a sad life to me. I mean, look at this thing. Do I really need to say anything else? This entire Pokemon line is the epitome of what it is to be a goofy goober. And I know I give Scarlet and Violet a lot of crap, because it deserves it. But Paldea is also the generation that blessed us with these two treasures. It's so interesting that they decided to make this an entirely new line instead of making it the Paldean version of Tentacool, but seeing it run around on its legs brings me so much joy. There's something so special about these animations, like it releases that happy chemical in my brain. I ended up running one on my team and it immediately became one of my favorite Pokemon. It just looks so happy to be here. Funny enough, this Pokemon would often die when I would play through my adventures, but I always kept it around because of how it made me feel. Like, this was the personality hire for my team, and I love it so much. I already talked about how Dunsparce was already a nothing Pokemon in Gold and Silver, but then several decades later, they finally decide to hit the drawing board and come up with an evolution. For years, fans were looking forward to Dunsparce improving through a Mega Evolution, a new form, or maybe even a regular evolution, only for it to get a bit longer when it made its debut in Paldea. It looks nearly identical to its original form, not really changing much of its design, and it remains just a mono type with no extra typings to go along with it. They also made collecting this thing an absolute nightmare, since there exists a 2-segment form and a 3-segment form. While most Dunsparce Dunsparce will evolve into the version with 2 segments, there is a 1 in 100 chance that it will become the 3-segment form when it evolves, making 3-segmented Dunsparce one of the most difficult luck-based shinies to obtain. It will be a test of your patience as you are constantly evolving this thing to get that 3rd phase. All for this Pokemon to be mid and look like this. Easily my least favorite inclusion in Scarlet and Violet. But yes, these are my favorite and least favorite Pokemon from each generation 1 through 9. And I know we still got some time before Generation 10 drops, and thank goodness, they should take all the time in the world, but the world of Pokemon is so vast with so many creatures to choose from. The way we develop relationship with these creatures is pretty crazy when you think about it. How these fictional monsters almost feel real when you look at them. The memories and stories of our first Pokemon adventure through a brand new region is always a special one, and I look forward to all of the new monsters that they drop in the future. Thank you all so much for watching. Please be sure to comment, like, subscribe, and stay awesome.